All right, testing, testing. All right, everybody, we're going to start our second panel. And first off, I was advised to thank our sponsors, Dowling Company, D.R. Horton, and Hawaiian Dredging. The objective, yes, we would not be here without our sponsors. Thank you very much. The objective of our second panel is to address the question, why does it take so long to build housing? And we're going to kind of showcase Tracy Tonaki, who's the president of D.R. Horton, why it took them so long to build housing. But what I want to do is start off with a brief introduction of all three of our panelists. And then I'm going to ask specific questions for each of our panelists. And then that should give us ample time to kind of have a give and take in terms of discussion, and then bring up questions from the audience. For those of you who are on virtual, please make sure you put your name and affiliation on your questions, so that way we know how to address those questions. So why don't we start off with, I'm going to do a brief introduction of Tracy, Dr. Scheuer, and Hakeem from the Hawaii Public Housing Authority. D.R. Horton built its first home in 1978, subsequently delivered more than 1 million homes, and operates in 45 of the 50 top markets in the US, as well as being located in 33 states. Tracy has worked for D.R. Horton for over 20 years and led the company's planning, design, permitting, procurement, and government relations, and now assumes the role of president since 2021, right? Dr. Jonathan Scheuer has a varied background, with heading the Land Use Commission, working with the Sierra Club, the Barrio Council, DHHL, OHA, and Land Trust gives him a very broad perspective on building housing in Hawaii. Dr. Scheuer is also noted water policy expert, which is very interesting, in particular with Maui, and has led efforts to acquire thousands of acres for conservation. He's a published author, noted lecturer at UH. Please welcome Dr. Scheuer. Last but not least, Hakeem Wansafi, who is the executive director of the Hawaii Public Housing Authority since 2011. So he has extensive experience and heads up one of the largest housing authorities in the nation, responsible for billions of dollars of federal and state housing assets. Recognized for his social justice and philanthropic work, earned him the distinction as Flame of Hope Award, Man of the Year. Let's welcome Hakeem Wansafi. Okay, as you all know, we have a very experienced and enlightened panel here. I hope to engage them in some interesting conversation, but we'll start off with Tracy. Okay. First off, why don't you all grab your microphones? I want to start off with Tracy by starting off with a brief overview of the whole Pili project. When the idea of actually thinking about developing this land out in West Oahu, and what motivated D.R. Horton to actually move forward on such a daunting task?
Thank you, Mike, and thank you for having me here today. I always appreciate sharing as well as learning from the other panelists and the other panel sessions. A little bit about D.R. Horton. We started out building homes as under Schuler Homes. Some of you may know who Jim Schuler is, who was our founder, and that was 50 years ago, actually, when Jim first started building. And our primary focus is county affordable housing and first-time home buyers, workforce housing, and that really is, we call it our mission and our passion, and that's where we fit in the housing industry. I will say that there are many different ways to build housing, and there's many different types of housing, and we need them all. We need them all. So when I'm up here today representing D.R. Horton, I'm speaking on behalf of the way we build. And it's really important for you to understand that, because as others have mentioned, a one size does not fit all. The way Hakeem builds is very different from the way we do, and the way Stanford and Christine and all of the other builders and developers build housing are all extremely different. Every project is different. So I'll get back to the one size fits all maybe in another question. But for Ho'opili, we actually took a first look at the lands that Ho'opili sits on in 1995. Back then, we were under a PSA to purchase it from Campbell, 800 acres, so a little about half of what we actually purchased 10 years later. We passed on that at that time because of the market had softened. But we were a firm believer that the city had identified that piece of land for decades in its EVA development plan to be urbanized for much needed housing. And it fit our mission. It still fits our mission today. So in 2005, we re-entered our second PSA, purchase and sale agreement with James Campbell, and started our process. So 2005 was our start. We went through 7 years of LUC hearings, 2 applications. We got our LUC decision and order in 2012. We then immediately submitted for our city and county rezoning application. That took another 3 years. So we got our city and county decision and order in 2015. So 10 years later, we were fully entitled. We started pushing dirt or our site work in 2016. And we celebrated a moment in July 17th, 2017, when we moved our very first home buyer into Ho'opili. And gives me chicken skin today, because it was a local family, first-time home buyers, saved up all their lives. They had 2 teenage kids to purchase a home, and they chose Ho'opili. And if you can imagine, we were building kind of in the middle of nowhere for a while, right? The north-south road had been built. Rail was getting built. UH Oahu, West Oahu was coming out of the ground. Kamakana Li'u was just getting started, I think. And they chose us, and they chose Ho'opili. And so our whole team went out there we have a key turnover event, and wanted to congratulate them and thank them that they talk Ohana. And from then on, 2017, to today, we've moved in over 2,600 families. So 2,600 families call Ho'opili home today. Ho'opili is zoned for 11,750 residential units in a mixed-use community plan that includes commercial, industrial, retail, office. We have 5 school sites that we're donating 94 acres of land to the Department of Education, and we're hopeful that they're going to start the first new school within Ho'opili. We have an elementary school ready and prepped for them, and we're going to be finishing up the East Kapolei High School site for them come this March. We have 2,600 families with a lot of kids, as you can imagine, affordable housing, first-time home buyers, and workforce housing that would like to go to school within their community. So it took us from 2005 to now, 18 years later, to get 20% of Ho'opili built. And when we first started in 2005, for a little bit of context, my son, Cole, was 3 years old, so he was going to preschool. As we went through the LUC, he went through elementary school. Then as we went through the city and county rezoning process, he went through middle school. And as we started building, he went through high school. My son, Cole, is going to graduate from college next year. So thank you. I hope he graduates. But if you do the math on how long it takes us, right? And believe me, we've been pushing hard. Where's Governor Waihee? We've been pushing hard and we're building. We're building the housing that what we got land rezoned for, and we're building it as fast as we can with the endurance that we have to run this marathon. And if you do the math on how we've been building year over year, my son's going to be 42 when we finish.
Okay. Let me ask you a question here. When you first thought of this vision to build Ho'opili, was it in the back of anybody's mind that it would take over 20 years to get it anywhere near starting?
This is a good question. I don't think so. I think if I answered yes, everybody would think we're crazy. No, it didn't. We learned a lot through the LUC process. A lot of feedback. Ho'opili means coming together in Hawaiian, and we were where it's situated is kind of a connector to the Kapolei side, to Ewa, to Waipahu, and we wanted to make sure that that is indeed what we did, that our Ho'opili Community Task Force, who gave us a lot of feedback and input, that helped shape the design of Ho'opili. The feedback we got through the LUC process has shaped Ho'opili, and I think for the better, right? Ag was a big issue, right, during our LUC proceedings. The lands that Ho'opili sits on, which is over 1,550 acres, was ag land. And we were asking to rezone it to urban. But what the process, as long as it was, as arduous as it was, helped us make Ho'opili better. We have an urban ag plan. I can talk all day.
I think she's talking because Dr. Schur is on the panel, and she's kind of saying, "Oh, well, okay, it's cool. We learned a lot about what happened, and LUC kind of set it up." Let me ask you a question first. I want you to discuss a couple of the major hurdles and roadblocks you faced. And mind you, as a developer, and I'm only naming the stuff that came on the top of my head: anti-development sentiment, environmental or cultural hurdles, land use, government regulatory challenges, affordability percentage of your built housing, the EIS process, and legal. So that's a lot. Which of these various entities or issues proved to be one or two of the biggest roadblocks you face?
Well, I will say that I am the fourth president of D.R. Horton. My predecessors, who are super people, my mentors, and that led the process of rezoning, Mike Jones and Bob Rule, many of you know them. They're not here today because they have PTSD, right? And may have a different answer than I do. I'm the fourth person. I'm here I was with the company through the process, and I'm here to carry on our commitments. But it was arduous, no doubt. Will we do it again? Not sure, right? It's a lot of financial commitment. It continues to be a financial commitment. It's emotional, because I will tell you, we care about Hawaii's families. And again, our core business is building homes for Hawaii's families. And when you're being attacked and when you're being challenged about that mission, it's hard. But it's a huge financial commitment. It takes a lot of master planning. It takes a lot of strategic planning. It takes a lot of political planning. It takes a lot of everything. Would we do it again? I'm not sure. We went through the LUC at a time when social media was just getting started. I think social media has changed the game. And it's hard, it's tough, it makes it tough.
Okay, great. Last question before we move on to Dr. Schur. what do you feel should be done to speed up the processes? I mean, you talked about LUC, maybe you didn't talk about EIS, you didn't talk about any of the anti-development sentiment, but what would you recommend to be done that would help speed up this 20-year process that Ho'opili has gone through?
Speak freely, please.
I'm asking Tracy this right now.
Oh, you're asking?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you were asking, Jonathan. What would we do to speed up the? Well, okay, so the politically correct answer is we need to collaborate more. Most definitely, right? But what I would really like is for, and I say this with the utmost respect, is for government to get out of the way. We're not one of the, meaning that I truly believe we have the right intentions. We have the right heart. We've been here for 50 years. We're going to be here for another 50. Why would we mess that up? So believe us when we say what we're going to do, we're going to do. We're trying to do that right now, and it's still taking us a long time, right? It never ends. It's kind of a motto in our office. And it has to. Someone in the current city administration asked me once, what can we do to help? And I just said, can you please just get out of the way? Because at every turn, we have to seek someone's approval. At every step forward, we take 2 steps back. And it's a game of inches, guys. It is a game of inches. There's no silver bullet. Seth is right. But those inches are hard, right? So deregulate, we all talk about it. Deregulation, we talk about collaboration. We talk about, everybody says it, we need housing, but I think everyone needs to dig deep whether they believe that. Because sometimes the message is, I absolutely support housing, but not here, right? So it's not just the elected officials, it's not us, this group here, it's not the industry, it's also the community. You have to be true to what you're saying. If you believe in housing, then collaborate. Otherwise, just tell the truth that you don't support it.
All right, good. I like that. Now we jump to point counterpoint. We go over to Dr. Schroyer and ask him, from your perspective, how important is housing and what role does government regulation play in its development? And mind you, he has a very varied background ranging from the conservation group all the way to water to other aspects that oftentimes slow or derail development moving forward.
So mahalo for everything that you said and set this up in the first panel. I think the only other thing I would just call out in the work that I do is that my work for DHHL is to secure water for housing. So I'm also looking at the issue from there. As most of you know, the lands that Kuhio managed to get set aside for homesteading after over a decade of work negotiating between DC politicians and local elites were dry and remote. So the delivery of water to DHHL lands is the only way we actually get to build homesteads. I guess I want to reframe a couple things about the question. We can talk about what's the role of government in housing in Hawaii. I think we just always have to remind ourselves, affordable housing and housing access is not a problem unique to Hawaii, right? It is a global problem, and particularly a global problem in any place that is vaguely desirable to live in. And so there's all sorts of issues and forces far beyond our shores. In Hawaii, we also have, sort of leading into that, I think an almost insatiable demand for housing at every price point, from literally the houseless who move here because it is easier to be houseless in Hawaii than it is in other areas, to the 1% of the 1%. And so we are in a context, and I think that was recognized on some level at the start with the state's land use law, that you could possibly build your way to satisfy that entire demand, but at a level of transformation of Hawaii that most of us would be like, yeah, I don't necessarily want to see our islands be like that. And so what's the role of government in Hawaii in housing? It's twofold. There's the stuff that Hakeem and others do, which is really about getting certain segments of the market satisfied with their housing needs and using various tools, some of them zoning, some of them incentives of various kinds, some of them direct build. And then there's also the role that I've played a part in on the LUC and in a sort of way on the Island Burial Council for Oahu, of in the course of providing housing, how can we protect things that the people of Hawaii has said as a whole are of great value to us? Things like agricultural land, water resources, and particularly any public trust resources, resources held by the government in trust for all the people.
Awesome. Good discussion there. In fact, you've heard from Tracy in terms of how long it's taken Ho'opili to move forward. And with your most recent experience with the LUC, what role do you think the LUC had in extending that process, or making it, I guess, more challenging or providing more hurdles for the developer to move forward? And how important is that role, other than you're saying protecting the environment and cultural issues?
So I was on the Land Use Commission from 2014 to 2022, 8 years, the last 4 years as the chair. I got appointed by the LUC after 7 of the 9 members resigned rather than have their financial disclosures. So there were suddenly a lot of vacancies. They could cast a wider net. I was not there for any of the 2 original dockets that Ho'opili went through. So I've done a little bit of reading through the decisions and orders to prepare for today. The one time that Ho'opili touched while I was in front of the Land Use Commission was on one of my first meetings. And the intervener from the second docket, Friends of Makakilo, brought a order to show cause on claiming that D.R. Horton had violated certain terms that the LUC had placed as a condition of development. And the first part of that entire hearing was D.R. Horton's attorney trying to get me disqualified from participating in the hearing because I was a member of the Sierra Club, and he said that this was an inevitable conflict of interest. The commission chair at the time, Ed Axon, denied the motion.
Well, that's why you're on this panel.
And then I actually ended up sort of leading, because the petition that was bought claiming that those conditions were not met had no merit, I sort of led the questioning on showing that it had no merit, and we denied the petition. And so it ended this possible roadblock. And afterwards, I think your counsel came up to me and said, "Oh, sorry, I didn't know you were on our side." I'm like, I'm not really on either side. I'm just trying to make sure that we follow our laws, right? And so with my limited understanding, and Tracy, totally jump in if I have this history wrong, because you lived it and I read it. But like, I think the first petition in front of the LUC for redistricting for Ho'opili, there's this particular condition that all LUC dockets are supposed to have, and it goes directly to what Governor Waihee was talking about, is that when we rezone lands, we want to make sure they're actually built. So either you are promising to build all your housing in 10 years, or you do an incremental petition that says, we're getting approval for this first phase, and then here's how we're going to do our next phases. And so my understanding was the Office of Planning at the time said to Ho'opili on their first petition, we don't see incremental redistricting in here. We have concerns with this petition. D.R. Horton chose to move ahead anyway. The intervener ends up filing, and the specific thing that happened on the first petition was, hey, the law requires incremental redistricting or a specific consideration of it. And they spoke, and the OP who had raised the issue also spoke about it, and they convinced 5 LUC commissioners, and so that's why the first petition was denied. Now, I actually think Ho'opili is a really good project, but I have been in the LUC with a number of projects which are just unforced errors by the development community. Things that are like, these are very clear requirements in the law. you know what, we're going to try and like go around it a little bit, go a little bit faster to try and get through. And I get the incentive and the economic demands that you might want to pursue those things. But I mean, part of my take on development in Hawaii is like sometimes the seemingly slow path is the fastest path. And what gets you locked in litigation, what gets you locked in denials are trying to like, oh, we're just going to interpret this, you know, as liberally as we can in a way that allows us to get through the process as quick as possible.
Tracy, any comment to that?
No. No, I appreciate Jonathan's feedback, and he's right. We went through our first petition. We pulled it back. We needed to do some phasing. I think, again, it makes it Ho'opili a better project. Our, you know, ag was a big issue. Legal litigation was a big issue. We went all the way to the Supreme Court and won. All the while still believing in the project, still investing in the project. So, you know, again, to Governor's comment, we are a developer that's going to put our money where our mouth is, and we're doing it. We just need your help to do it faster.
Okay, well, good, good. For Dr. Scheuer, another question. He represents a wide, I guess, group of people, or he's represented, and I wanted to ask him specifically, what role do conservationists, Sierra Club, and other groups like this that oftentimes monitor development, are they viewed as anti-development? Is that accurate?
Thank you. There's a few ways I want to respond to this. I think we're definitely viewed in certain circles as anti-development. I don't think that these communities, and just to be really clear, my current affiliation with the Sierra Club is I'm a member, so I pay my whatever $85 a year dues. I'm not part of the leadership, and I was never part of the litigation against Ho'opili. But I support a lot of what the Sierra Club does. And I'm really trying to think and listen and hear everything that was said and not said about Tracy's comment about you can't just say you're for housing and, you know, not acknowledge certain things. I think I want to talk about my time on the Burial Council, which was certain at the onset of the state burial law viewed as an obstacle to development, yet another obstacle to development. And when I started my 3 years on the Oahu Island Burial Council as one of the 2 Konomoku representatives, 2 projects came forward at the exact same time in Kaka'ako, at opposite ends of Kaka'ako. One was Kauai Church wanting to build a multi-purpose facility. And Kalamai, if any of you were involved in either of these projects. And the other, at the opposite end of Kaka'ako, was Alexander and Baldwin trying to build the Waihonua at Kewalo luxury condominium. And so coming in without the experience of having sat on the council, and if you had asked me like, hey, who's going to get through the process fast and who's not of this council, which by law is a majority of Native Hawaiians, I would have said like, oh, you know what? They're going to nail A and B, which has on water issues a very, very troubled history with the Native Hawaiian community. And Kauai Church, a Hawaiian institution led by Hawaiians, a nonprofit, building a building nominally for like community service purposes, right? But what happened was the exact opposite. And Kauai Church has actually is in the process of still recovering from what their proposed project was, and Waihonua at Kewalo has long been built. And this was really interesting because at the start of the process, on the advice of various parties, Kauai Church said, our first thing is, OIBC, Oahu Island Burial Council, you have no role in this. This is an established cemetery. You don't actually get to say in this, even though we had people like Paulette Kaleikini, who were known cultural descendants of the Kaka'ako area, who are saying like, no, we know that there's also non-traditional burials in this area as well. We have a concern. Alexander and Baldwin, and this is where my super enviro friends cringe when I talk about this part of it, started from the day after they closed on the property. They reached out to non-cultural practitioners and said, you know what, we want to meet with you every month. I mean, we're not even in front of the LUC or the OIBC yet, but we want to meet with you every month and talk about what our plans were. And so over a 2-year course, every month they went and they talked story with these people. And what happened in the course of Waihonua at Kewalo was that first, they did a really extensive survey by the best firm in town, CSH. I know they're super expensive, but the best firm in town. And they did a really thorough cultural survey with lots of trenches, and they found a post-contact cemetery. And so they went to this group and they said, listen, what do you think? They're like, change your project. So they changed the project. They literally changed the design of the building, set up a big burial preserve in the front so that they would protect this post-contact cemetery. Then as they got ready to break ground, they said, you know what, we're still really concerned. This is a very sensitive area. We're going to actually pay CSH to hand dig parts of the foundation to make sure that we don't have like a construction bucket come up with iwi kupuna. And even though this was a very dense set of trenches, right between 2 trenches, they discover an ancient burial ground, including 2 with signs that they were ali'i burials. Now, at first, you would think, okay, that's it, you're screwed, right? Your project is not going through. But because they had developed such a relationship, there were some very difficult, hard conversations. And nobody was like super happy, but they changed the footings of the project a little bit and preserved all but 2 of those burials in place. And the project was built, whereas it took multiple lawsuits and struggles and on the other side of Kaka'ako, and nothing was ever built. And so it's not the proposer, it's not the project, it's the process.
Wow, great summary of the objective of this conference to discuss the process, right? Very
And
interesting.
really props to A and B for
Yeah,
having led
yeah,
that process.
yeah. All right, last question to Dr. Schroer. With government's push for affordable housing, do you feel that there are areas of compromise for these various stakeholders? I mean, we're talking developers all the way to the Sierra Club, that could be done to actually move this needle forward and trying to speed up building housing. Do you have any suggestions or ideas?
A couple, and I'm going to draw on the last panel. First of all, the questions that Tom Kaufman mentioned that people ask about housing are still the same questions. Who for, who's profiting, where, right? So it's not a blanket, we're opposed to housing, but there's questions about, okay, we want to know answers to those questions. I think there is a belief that we need more housing, but there's also a belief that just building more housing won't solve all of the problems. When we actually talk about what we want on housing, we want to have local families housed, right? We're not necessarily looking to build more gated luxury subdivisions for the world's elite. And so I think that when we want to talk about building more housing, unless we frame the discussion in a way that is more specific about the kind of housing that we want, somewhere between just for local people or we need to build everything in every market class, that would be one way to actually build a better conversation and better solutions. The other thing I just have to point out is that what I learned on 8 years on the LUC was that, and Governor Waihee mentioned this, we have over 10,000 units, I think it's closer to 20,000 units on Oahu in the urban district that are not being built. So why not? Some of them are along Kunia Road, and quite a few of them have been converted for the next 20 to 30 years to solar farms. And they came up to the LUC and said, listen, that's also a state goal. We want to have solar farms on that land. Please change our conditions to allow us to do that. And we did. But those lands are in the urban district and not getting built for housing. There's some lands like the Makaiva Ridge next to Makakilo. It's been entitled for decades. I just honestly don't know why it's not being built. There's some lands like the Castle and Kokoa Ridge Phase 2, which is across the gulch above the Gentry by Waiava, KS Waiava project. The condition on that was that you had to build a bridge across the Gulf to H3. That's, I guess, $100 million, maybe $200 million to build it. There's no way a developer's ever going to pencil that out, right? And it was supposed to go in time with the KS project. And then the KS project, I'll mention this because they came to their 3rd or 4th, right before I left LUC, their 3rd or 4th request to modify their conditions. And that project was approved initially the year I graduated from Iolani, 1987. And their proposal is that they're not going to finish building out, I might have this number slightly wrong, but until like 2060. And so I'm like, it took me being an aggressive LUC chair in cross-examination in our quasi-judicial process, questioning a ton of people from KS, why is that the case? And then finally I said, well, actually that's what our market absorption study shows.
Wait, before you move on. So if you're saying 2060, D.R. Horton's project is really fast then.
Yeah. So, and I think the truth with, and just so you know, like the scale, Waiava is 12,000 units. It's even slightly bigger than Gentry, or excuse me, Kalamai, Ho'opili. Why are they building it so slow? Well, because as an institution that is concerned with making as much money as possible for its beneficiaries, they don't want to flood the market. They don't want to drive prices down. But to me, sitting on the LUC, getting nailed at and yelled at every legislative session that we are somehow the sole barrier to affordability in Hawaii, I was like, no, you got to build this faster. So some of it is, I'll close on this, and Kalamai, if I've taken too much time on my responses. The LUC currently has enforcement powers that is one, reversion, and we can only revert a project back to the district it was in if they haven't started development. That is the equivalent of the state only having the death penalty as a solution for all crimes. You murdered somebody, death penalty. You jaywalked, death penalty, right? We could use a slightly more nuanced set of policy tools to try and encourage people who are already in the district not to speculate on land, but actually to build housing that we need.
Wow, that's enlightening. That in its own statement kind of shows you that the LUC's role is oftentimes hand-tied too. I mean, they only have one vote to determine what happens in terms of going forward. So great, good commentary. Okay, we're going to bring in Hakeem now. You have a developer's role, you have kind of the regulatory role, now we have the government's perspective. So the first question I have for you is, as the primary government entity that oversees the management of thousands of housing units in the state of Hawaii, what is your own personal perspective on affordable housing and the marketplace?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you, and thank you for putting me in the middle. That is the role of the government, so we're just trying to mediate between the two over here. But so I know we talk about affordable housing, but it's really has become unaffordable housing. Our role as agency with the 45,000 tenants that we serve is to keep it at 30% of the income, no matter what your income is. So the 45,000 folks that we serve, the average family, not individual, the average family makes $12,000 a year. So our role is twofold. One, how can we keep those folks housed in a variety of different programs, from public housing, federal and state, to different vouchers and others. But when we open up the wait list and you have 10,000 folks, 10,000 families apply to get 300 or 400 available units, our focus as an agency has shifted. How can we build more affordable housing? And with that, there are certain challenges. You don't want to just build for the poor. There's a deconcentration of poverty that has to take place. There is also federal government restrictions. For example, public housing, you cannot build more public housing. You can only replace one for one if you want it to be subsidized, and that's based
Hold on, you said the federal government says you cannot build additional public housing, you have to replace it?
So in 1998, the Congress passed a law, Fair Cloth Limit, and basically the government said we can no longer subsidize more than what we have nationwide. So they put that number, whatever that number at the time, and that's it. So you can build public housing, but it has to be state-sponsored, and that's about $15,000 a year per family, which we don't have a lot of. So what we do right now in order to deconcentrate poverty, we take units that's 6 decades old. Again, the federal government used to give our housing agency what we need to actually fix the units. And so far, I think as of a month ago, so we have about $780 million backlog. So instead of building at the prices, what we have embarked in, how can we increase the inventory? How can we actually build a community instead of building projects? So our role, I think, our agency's role is more of a developer that working for those who do not have money. I mean, we keep the affordability for life. Obviously, we're government, so we're nonprofit. There is no profits there. And we team up with other developers. We do recognize that you need the expertise that the developers bring in to be able to deliver on those.
Awesome. Your governmental agency was in a newspaper just recently. Tell me about the Calais Momi redevelopment project and the whole emergency proclamation by the governor to build 10,000 houses. Is that something that, I don't know, that's your responsibility. So your plan of action going forward will be.
So there are two things. To clarify, the emergency proclamation was not put together for our project to build the 10,000. So the governor's proclamation, day one, he issued a proclamation on homelessness to be able to facilitate, and it's working. All of our government agencies suffer from short staffing. Just in the housing arena, over 500 vacant positions between the county and us. So this housing proclamation will help us to speed up that process for the bottleneck. We lose our staff to higher paying jobs. The developers take some of our staff and things. Then we have to start from the beginning and try to staff up. Now the 10,000 units, additional units, it's been derived from identifying 9 different sites, federal sites that come with federal subsidy, that are really in a prime area and that they're not best utilized. The land is not best utilized. You can put a lot more. It's close to the rail. It's close. There's some infrastructure there and more infrastructure to come. So we went out for a procurement, selected a developer who will team up with other developers to be able to demolish those units. And they qualify for demolition under the federal rules because the TDC, the price to build it, it's the price to fix it. It's sometimes same or higher than the price. But along those, what we've demanded and required from the developer and selection was based on is a few things. One, can we use the purchasing power of 10,000 units to be able to reduce some of the materials? Second, the pricing of the bonds and other things, we can have a better pricing. But mainly to be able to build a community for our children instead of having all poor people concentrated. And you can point to that, that's the project. We want to be able to, our communities, our children, not to feel left out and to work together. And that's why we're building all kinds of incomes up to 100% AMI and those in Kalilomi that you have mentioned.
Okay. That's awesome. I just saw in a newspaper about Mayor Wright is a big project that you're planning, and they're adding an additional maybe 2,000 units on top of what's already built. Is that kind of in keeping with your objective to try to build more housing and in that particular price range?
Yeah, so Mayor Wright is one of the 9 identified sites. So in total, we'll be demolishing about 1,200 units, and statewide, including Kauai, Big Island, and Maui, and replacing them with an additional 10,000. So we'll be building about 12,000. In Mayor Wright that you have mentioned, we have gone through the process, finished the EIS, finished the NEPA, all of that for 2,450 units. And the plan is to start the first phase that has 2 components. Excuse me. One is a light tech product, about 300 units. And then the second tower will be more of a 501c3 bond, the missing middle, 80 to 100% EMI, and possibly another tower for sale, for affordable sale. So that's the mayor right project. In addition to that, what's happening right now, what's going is KPT, that's HEA Park Terrace, the low rise. We just got an email yesterday that we got a tax credit allocation for 304 units, phase one. And that's the building permit. It's in the process of getting permitted. And School Street, I think we should be getting the building permit in next 2 months. And that's 800 seniors, 100% affordable for life, 100% seniors, and phase one, 250 units that will start next year, early next year.
Wow, I mean, you just kept track of all those numbers. Those are thousands of units being added into the marketplace.
But I have to add that although we're a state agency, we go through the same process.
Right.
We have to apply, we have to wait, we have to beg, we have to do a lot of different things to be able to get it. So,
okay, so a very basic question as a layperson. So do you feel that building more public housing will solve the housing shortage?
So building housing in general, that's what's going to help. Just building public housing or replacing is just a small part. Where we are today, I think we all say with words that there is an emergency. We all say with words that we need housing. But it doesn't seem that there is some budging from starting with, as you mentioned, build it, but not in my backyard kind of thing, or build it cheaper, but we as a government, we're gonna charge you all the fees, this impact fee and that impact fee and all of that. The uncertainty for the developers costs some money, and the time costs some money. Mm-hmm. So, and also some the developers, they are great developers and they are developers. So the only thing that's going to solve this is truly that everyone looks inward, all of us, not just the government, the developers themselves, the consultants that sometimes will argue with certain professionals that I know better because I'm private, you don't know because you're an agency, and waste time. So we have to all look inward, because a lot of times, even in our project, the consultant will put something together, he goes to and gets sent right back, and that wastes a lot of time, and oftentimes some of those agencies are correct, and then that delays the process. So the only thing that's can, I think, solve this crisis is that all of us look inward, and all of us have to give something. Nobody has to just stay firm that it's my way, but all of you change. That's not going to happen.
Okay, so compromise, collaboration, all very important in terms of trying to resolve this. The initial project of this panel was, why does it take so long to build housing? But you actually have builders, government and private sector, building housing, and in support, you have the regulatory bodies all supporting ultimately the building of more housing. So at this juncture, what I want to do is kind of open this up to questions from the audience. I'll sit down there, and then why don't we see what questions you have for private, regulatory, and governmental entities here in terms of why it takes so long to build housing. We have questions?
How to turn this on. Hello. Okay. Hi, good morning. Vivian Pham from Kaiser Permanente Community Health Team. You know, I know our keynote speaker, Governor Green, is going to speak about rebuilding Maui, but I'd love to hear from you on what your thoughts on the process, you know, with over 10,000 residents being displaced, and knowing from reports of post-Katrina the mental, physical, and economic health of survivors being negatively impacted, continuing to move post-disaster. So, you know, you talked about collaboration and in the process and deregulation. What do you think it would take to rebuild Maui quickly for those 10,000? And how do you prioritize those that get it first?
That's a great question. Why don't we start off with Tracy in terms of how long you think it would take to go through that? And then Jonathan, you can mention the regulatory aspect, and then Hakeem can mention the governmental aspect of building housing in such a serious situation.
Well, it's a very good question, and I'm sure all of us in this room have asked us every other day, right? How is this going to play out? I don't have a silver bullet answer. It is going to be complex, obviously, right? Infrastructure alone is always challenging, whether it's new greenfield building like we're doing, or whether it's rebuilding Lahaina that has gone through a devastating experience. My hope is that, again, I speak to collaboration. I know it's a coined word, but there are a ton of lawsuits going around all over the place with Lahaina. And my hope is that that litigation, that litigative process doesn't stand in the way. Because more and more we're seeing litigation, even for D.R. Horton and Ho'opili, becoming an obstacle in the process. Not just at the LUC, not just through entitlements, but today as we build. And, you know, I just hope that everyone can put that aside, set an intent, set a goal, and be truthful to that goal, right? It's gonna take a long plan. I don't have the answers for you. It's gonna take a strong leadership team, and it's going to take community, right? There are a lot of wide and diverse voices that are coming out about Lahaina and its future. And it's gonna take everyone to be at the table and to give a little, to hopefully get a lot.
Jonathan?
Mahalo for the question. And I appreciate the comments from Tracy. The way I think about my initial response to that question is first, we want to get people back into homes, but we also want to stabilize them during that process, which even if it went with the like Chinese level speed of like, we could do it in 6 months, people still have to be somewhere for 6 months, right? And we know it's going to be longer than 6 months. There are, according to folks I've talked with Maui County Planning Department in the West Maui planning area, I believe somewhere between at least 1,000 to 2,000 units that are used as Airbnbs or other equivalent rentals. We have the opportunity to step in and say, rather than having people scatter to all the winds, those units need to be available for that unhoused community right now. And I believe part of the value to building more and building back faster and better in doing something like that is that there are people, and I've been part of ongoing conversation convened by the Hawaii Community Foundation post-Lahaina recovery, and there's lots of conversations going on, and people on the ground are like, literally, I don't know where I'm sleeping next week. So please don't try and talk to me about long-term planning. And so, I mean, and right, if you didn't hear it at HCPO, like literally the head of Maui County Planning lost her home in the fire. So like, what can we do to take care, we're still in recovery, those immediate needs, even if it takes a sort of aggressive action and saying like, listen, maybe Mumbai, you get to use your units as Airbnb, but right now they are for our people right now. Because it's not truly in West Maui, it's the way I understand it when I look at the numbers, and I could be wrong, it's not that we don't have enough housing in West Maui, we don't have access to enough housing in West Maui. I'll pivot to water. So the major water source that supplies Lahaina is the Honokauai Aquifer. The states that sustainable yields for Honokauai. The sustainable yield is, if you can take every drop in the best way possible, 6 billion gallons a day. Historic recent pumping is 6.5 million gallons a day. So if you catch what I'm saying is we're taking too much water out of the ground. And for DHHL, our ability to deliver 1,200 units at Honokauai and another a few hundred units at Leali'i depends on having an additional water source. Well, we found out that of that pumping from Honokoia Aquifer, about 2.5 million gallons a day comes from tunnel sources dug into the mountains, but they're being used to irrigate coffee trees by Kaanapali Land Company. One of those 2 tunnel sources is entirely on state land. It's not even like privately controlled. So like, start to give water access that's needed for development to the priority uses. When we say we want to build housing, like, seems to me like, I like coffee trees. I drink coffee every day, but like, there's R1 water that could be used for coffee. Can we get drinking water for the housing that we need? Let's take those steps too as we rebuild.
So Hakeem, from your perspective, developing public housing in an environment where there is such devastation, what role could HPHA play?
Yeah, thank you. So I know you mentioned earlier the government, so I can only speak for each PHA, but I have to say this, it's very important. To the question, I think like our governor has said, that's gonna come from the people of Lahaina. When they're ready and they're gonna prioritize. And that's something that he says also behind the scene. And that's why I'm truly proud of him, because I went through three governors. Proud of him because behind the doors, behind the scenes, all of the actions has to be motivated by caring for the people. So I take him for his word because he means it behind closed doors and in public, that the people of Lahaina are going to make those decisions. And for our agency, we lost 2 properties. And with that, we also lost two of our tenants. The mental well-being is very important. We teamed up with a lot of nonprofits and others that specialize in that. In the beginning, obviously, in hotels and everything else, but we still going through that process, identified multiple units that they're going to move to permanently, and working with the federal government to get some additional vouchers, and we'll work with them until we find a permanent housing. We're not planning to build anything in Lahaina at this time, because we don't know what the Lahaina folks wants to see. Instead, we'll be looking at other lands outside the area so we can build some much needed housing. It was a crisis before the fire. It's even more crisis right now. So we'll continue to build as many as we can.
Good commentary. Questions?
I have 2 questions. One is for Tracy. I know D.R. Horton is Texas-based, and I read in Austin, Texas, Icon Company designed affordable 3D houses, and those houses are designed to address their affordable housing challenges. And Icon claims that those houses can be built within less than 24 hours. So I'm wondering whether D.R. Horton has this vision of using modern technology to build homes for Hawaii. And the other question is for Hakeem. You just mentioned there's a law in 1998 say that additional public housing units can only be built unless a current old or existing units can be replaced. But I just checked out, not only be replaced, but you can also redevelop, either replace or redevelop. So I'm wondering, can you address about the redeveloper part that you omitted earlier addressing? Thank you.
Okay, good question. Tracy?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So absolutely, innovation is critical to development, to the way we build. We did look at Icon, actually, and part of being a division within D.R. Horton, we have the resources that we can tap, things that are going on the mainland U.S. We also have a benchmark, I will say, to our other divisions and their processes, and I will say that we are unique in our processes, and it's very well recognized in our company. So we did take a look at Icon, which is, if any of you know or don't, they're a 3D printing company that started up. The logistics and the process to get that here and to make it affordable was challenging. We continue to work with other stakeholders on prefabrication, on trying to negotiate the 2,500 miles of water that we have to bring everything over. The fact that we have to, we do order some materials from China, and sometimes it has to go to LA before it comes back to us. But innovation is key, not only in technology, but also in what we call product diversification, or the types of housing that we build. At Ho'opili, we have anywhere from studios all the way up to 4-bedroom condos. We have homes that are 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, all the way up to 5 bedrooms. We have ADU homes. We have old plantation style modern homes. So we're trying to diversify what we're building in Ho'opili to cast as wide a offering to Hawaii's home buyers and home renters. We have rental housing in Ho'opili that we partnered with other developers. So within Ho'opili today, 2,600 families represents families earning 30% of AMI all the way up to 200% and everything in between. And I think that makes for a vibrant community. Yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Hakeem?
Yeah, so thank you. The public housing, I want to differentiate 2 things. One, because we're a public housing agency, it doesn't mean we only build in public housing. The public housing, by definition, is the one that it's blind to income. If you're on the wait list, your name comes up, you're gonna pay 30% of your income. If the income is 0, you pay 0. In fact, multiple families, we write them a check so they can pay for electricity and utilities. So that's 1,200 units that we're gonna demolish. We're gonna replace it with exactly 1,200 units. In addition to that, because there is capacity, there is some water, there's some infrastructure, we build in other incomes. So about 7,000 units of the total 12,000, 10,000 net gain plus whatever we're gonna build. So about 7,000 is gonna be a light tech, that's 60% AMI or less. But we also build in about 3,000 units additional for the and middle, 80% to 100. So in a way, and we're not putting this tower is public housing, this tower is light tech. We're trying to have the people live together in the same tower. You would not know who the poor person is unless if he says, I make this income. So that's what we're trying to develop. And the amenities will be identical. The units will be the same. It's basically if you're poor, you're gonna live in the same than somebody else, a teacher or police officer, and really to reflect the community. And that's what the difference. Hope I answered the question.
Any additional questions?
Hakeem mentioned that the local government and the private sector have to go through the same process to get houses built. Am I correct?
Correct.
So help me understand why our local government continues to struggle to build while the private sector they can build a condo year after year, day after day. And a good example is Kaka'ako. There's condos coming up left and right. They're not struggling, and why do you continue struggling? That was my question.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for the question. We struggle if we don't have the proper and the appropriate developer, because we don't build it ourselves. We team up with the developer and we support that developer by providing the land at $1 a year kind of lease. And because the government is providing funding, it makes sure that the taxpayers' money is worth it. So the availability of funds is extremely important. So we apply for tax credit. There is a certain capacity. There's only X amount of bond cap that's available there. We apply, everybody else applies, and whoever gets it, the project goes first. We're lucky that we got it for this session, and that's moving forward, and as well for School Street. So I would say it is not because it's a government, it has to do with the funding that's available. It has to be with the developer that's been selected, because we ourselves don't go and build it or develop it. Thank you.
Jonathan?
Yeah, can I just add on to the response? Just so like, and I think if you've worked in Kaka'ako, you know, these are coming up real fast, but that's after decades of work and decades of taxpayer investment. I think what we saw in Kaka'ako was we didn't put enough restrictions on it to make sure that the housing that was produced was actually going to be meeting the market that I think everybody in this room would say that we want to have local families have a chance to have an accessible home. And that's what we didn't do. So it is coming up really fast right now compared to newly announced projects, but that's after, I mean, work since the 70s to sewer, other trunk infrastructure to make it available.
And over 90% of what we're building is rental. So yeah, the numbers have to work.
Can I- Jonathan makes a very good point that, you know, it took the towers in Kaka'ako years to come out of the ground. And, you know, a good story that I will share with you about Ho'opili is that, you know, after we went through our 10 years of entitlement and we were suffering from PTSD, we just kind of just kept our head down and tried to focus on building homes and get out of the ground, which we did in 2017, and we continue to this day. Now that the skyline is open and people rode the free weekend route, everyone saw Ho'opili. And the response we got back was, wow, you guys are building fast. And I just politely say, well, yeah, it's been 18 years, but yeah, we're building fast. So to Jonathan's point, what appears sometimes in today's time frame took a lot of entitlement and approval process prior to that.
And I actually feel better that I attended today because it's only took us 6 years and everybody's saying it takes us a long time.
What a great guy.
So we started School Street 6 years ago and shoveling the ground first quarter of next year. So that's
Awesome. So final question?
So Ezra Klein wrote an article recently called Everything Bagel Liberalism, where he observes that California has been dominated by progressive Democrats for a long time, yet can't seem to deliver on progressive policy goals. And his analysis is that the more goals that you try to pursue at the same time, the less of anything you get, because all of the stars have to align for any given project. And so my question is, do you think that this analysis and his conclusion that the inability or unwillingness to choose among competing priorities is what is causing California's problems? Do you think it's fair to extend this same idea to Hawaii? And if so, how can we reprioritize our policy goals? Thank you.
Oh, great question. Why don't we start with Jonathan on that, and we'll go to Hakeem and then end with Tracy.
So the hardest and most difficult question, I get to go first. California is the, fourth or 10th largest economy in the world. Explaining why California works or doesn't work in one column, I'm not sure is a necessarily great exercise. And I haven't read the column in question. But the general principle, are we pursuing too many things? And do we have to narrow our focus? So like say, for instance, we're just going to focus on housing and perhaps the implication of the question is maybe care a little bit less about environmental impact or ag land impact or other things. So to challenge slightly, and I really appreciated the first remarks, for some people it is Groundhog Day, right? For a lot of folks in the Native Hawaiian community, the Kanaka Maoli community, the last few decades have been not easy, but have some major wins. Things are actually, in some cases, getting very much better. Historic rights finally recognized. Streams dewatered for over a century, having a little bit of flow in them from Maukadamakai. So where you stand on where things are at definitely depends on where you stand. In Hawaii, one thing that makes us incredibly unique is the public trust doctrine that pervades all of our law and entitlement processes, which there's certain natural resources, water, and other things that cannot be privately owned, but are held in trust by the government, and the government's duty is to manage them as a trustee. And another duty government has is you cannot give that away. And so as much as we might want to fast track and do certain things, one of the reasons why the LUC sort of makes sense in our context, as frustrating as it can be from a development perspective, is that we have these duties for the protection of traditional and customary Native Hawaiian rights, for water resources and other public trust resources, and they can only be protected in a quasi-judicial process. The county process, which ultimately ends with each council, doesn't provide that layer of protection for people's actually legal rights that they have to these resources. So can we focus? We can certainly focus better. For me, the biggest challenge, and I realize how unsatisfying we need to collaborate more is as an answer to some of these tough questions, but I will say, in tribute to the previous governor, David Ige, more than any governor that I saw, board and commission positions were really, he wanted a diversity of voices. And so fewer decisions were overturned because in the deliberative process, in the deliberative public process, all the parties had some voices that saying, yeah, I'm hearing you, we're going to take in consideration of this project these concerns, which ultimately does speed things up. All of us, environmental community, native Hawaiian community, development community, to a certain degree, we live in echo chambers. And sometimes when we even have people brave enough to say, hey, you know, I want to be the naysayer in the room, right? It gets dismissed. Oh, that's just negative talk. I don't want to do it. And so there's a huge challenge for all of us, starting with myself. How deeply can we listen? Can we be willing to sit with people? I know it's not like the policy solution, but I really do believe it's part of the solution.
Hakeem?
Thank you. I think it's very difficult to really prioritize when everything is a priority. Healthcare, housing, education, environment, and others. So it has to be a balance. What's affecting us the most, and I think the reason for some of the housing emergency proclamation is people are leaving our state and not coming back, 14,000 each year. So if you ask me as a father of a child who decided to stay in Pittsburgh, housing is definitely a priority for me. How can I get my son back? Because he wants to come back. It's not that he does not want to come back. I wish I'd never sent him to Pittsburgh, but even if I didn't, he'll be living with me right now. So I'm glad I sent him to Pittsburgh. But I want him back. I want him back. So I think housing is a priority, and I think it's one of the reasons that our governor has really made that bold statement, no matter what anybody thinks. Not just his word, but the action. I am going to put a proclamation, and if there is some pushback, we're going to adjust because it's the governor of everyone, not just of the people who want to build. So I think housing is a priority because that will attract some teachers who want to come back and teach our children, but they can afford it. It's going to attract some healthcare nurses and others that want to come and help us here, but they can't afford it. And it's going to help, I think, in general. We have to do it methodically. We have to do it thoughtfully. But I think it should get some priority from my perspective.
Comment. Tracy?
Yeah, I love Hakeem's statement that when everything's a priority, nothing's a priority, and it's really hard. We have a difficult challenge on all levels. From the housing sector, I'm going to say housing is a priority. It should be at the top. Right? But I also believe in my involvement for the past 8 years with Institute for Human Services that housing is also a solution to homelessness. And the recognition that they're all interlinked is going to help get us inch by inch, game of inches again, moving forward in the right direction. And again, collaboration is a cheeky term, but it truly works. I do believe when we all sit at the table and roll up our sleeves and be honest, right, and open, that we're going to make a difference and continue to make a difference, inch by inch.
Okay. I have a couple of questions from our virtual audience. I know if you guys are willing to give us a couple of minutes more on a couple questions. And this is going to be directed to Tracy. It says here, large landowners, developers have historically profited without a commensurate contribution to infrastructure. Can that change by making a requirement that a significant increase in infrastructure funding by the landowner developer be part of any process of permitting for all levels of development, whether affordable or market prices?
It's a great question, and it already has. At Ho'opili, through our entitlement process, we have a long list of almost 30 infrastructure requirements that we are funding and we are building. Everything Ho'opili needs. Water, sewer, we're building water tanks, we're building large master sewer lines, we're building drainage, we're building roadways, we're building everything that the 11,750 residential units need. And I'm not complaining, but that's part of the process. If we didn't commit to that, we probably wouldn't have gotten approvals. And those list of 30 infrastructure requirements is an enormous amount of capital investment.
I wanted to throw a bomb over to Jonathan. And in regards to this, should the LUC incorporate that into other developments that, for instance, in Kaka'ako and other areas?
So the LUC doesn't have any jurisdiction in Kaka'ako. Of course, we only convert ag or conservation land into the urban district. It's entirely, well, their HCDA. Otherwise, if it's in the urban district, it's the city. We do. Those requirements that Tracy is laboring under were placed by a combination of the State Land Use Commission and the city county. In fact, surprised it didn't come up in our conversation. If we want to find a place of genuine collaboration, it would be government investment in core infrastructure, which can drive down the price of housing produced. It has to be done, as should have been done in Kaka'ako, with commensurate givebacks to make sure those units are for the people we want to get them to.
All right, we're down to
Can
our
I-
final.
I just want to add, but always keep in mind, the more we charge, the more expensive the units become. The more you require a developer to build these roads and everything else, and add this and add that, it increased the price, and
Can I add
that's.
one more?
Yep, go ahead.
No, Hakeem makes a good point. And I think, for most in this room, I think you understand that the list of 30 infrastructure requirements that D.R. Horton's required to build is being paid for by the home buyers. Right? So it's not a developer cost, it's a developer requirement, but it is driving the cost of housing up.
Absolutely. All right, last question. Does it make sense to build inexpensive to the occupant housing units on the most expensive urban land in Hawaii? Wouldn't you get more housing units on less expensive land near suburban rail stations? And I guess I'll throw this to Hakeem first.
Why me?
'Cause-
So I'm not even sure there is an inexpensive land. I think when we selected the development that we wanted to develop, we wanted the proximity to transportation. So we wanted an area that has some infrastructure, so you can start phase one. And we wanted an area that has a potential of going up, because there is not a lot of land, you just need to go up. So that's what we use as a basis. And government in general, our land is almost for free so long as you provide the affordable housing. So that's the criteria we use.
Okay. Tracy, any thoughts on the most expensive urban land in Hawaii? Why don't we build in suburban rail stations? But Ho'opili has suburban rail stations. And in terms of land value, what do you estimate that land value to be?
Oh, that's a good question. Very expensive. So there is no such thing, Hakeem is right, as cheap, inexpensive land anymore. When you add in the land, quote unquote land, really is developable land, which means it's got infrastructure, which again, we go back to the cost of infrastructure. But density is key to affordability now. The higher density that you can build, the lower you can bring down your cost, right? And I do agree, we have a rail station on Ho'opili and one just off Ho'opili. So we are in the future East Kapolei TOD Special District. I believe we're the only greenfield along the rail line, or large enough greenfield, but we have yet to have a special district approved for our area. But building higher density around rail stations, absolutely. Waipahu, everywhere, because those are the areas where transportation is available. And if we can reduce transportation costs, then we can reduce costs of living. So that's a good example of how solving for housing can also solve for other important policy issues that we have.
Awesome. So that's our last question. What I wanted to do is let's make sure we thank our panelists on what I thought very insightful discussion. All right. And Seth, discussion on lunch.
So thanks again, guys. That was like really, really interesting and inspiring. We're going to go have lunch at the How Tree, which is, I think, just right around the corner, downstairs and around the corner. But there will be people telling you that. So we will start at 11:45. I'd encourage you guys just to go to the bathroom, talk, stretch your legs, and then we'll get started. Thank you.